The topic for the today's webinar is pre-packed insolvency resolution process with recent amendments in IBC. Be a domain expert. And the speaker for the today's webinar is rank holder chartered accountant and advocate Sri Ashish Makhija ji. Now I request our core group member CA Vijeta Jaiswal ji to formally introduce the speaker CA Ashish Makhija ji.
Thank you, convener sir. It is indeed a pleasure today to introduce such a prolific speaker, Mr. CA Ashish Makhija. He is a leading practitioner in insolvency and corporate law matters. As managing authority of AMC Law Firm, a firm headquartered in New Delhi, he bears top credentials in corporate law, insolvency and bankruptcy law, corporate litigation and advisory. He is the standing counsel for the official liquidator attached to High Court of Delhi for 6 years, handling many large-scale cases of corporate insolvency and liquidation. He regularly appears before Supreme Court, High Courts, NCLAT, NCLT, and in insolvency matters. Academically brilliant, CA Ashish Makhija was awarded gold medal by CBSE for obtaining 100% marks in mathematics. He has been a rank holder throughout. He ranked 3rd in the secondary school examination, 18th in CA final examination, 1st rank in LLB examinations from Delhi University, and magna cum laude from LLM from USA. He is a fellow member of the ICI and also a fellow member of the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. He holds 2 master degrees of law, one from India and Master of Law degree in International Bankruptcy from USA. He is also an insolvency professional. He is also currently pursuing PhD in law from Emory School of Law, Atlanta, USA. He also has the distinction of being a World Bank trained corporate trainer, and he is much sought after faculty and has spoken extensively on various subjects. And he's also authored 14 books on the subject of insolvency and bankruptcy and corporate law. Ashish Makhija is an avid contributor of articles in journals and online portals of repute such as the Chartered Accountant, the Chartered Secretary, the Resolution Professional, Current Tax Reporter, Market Mogul, to name a few. And he has contributed various articles in the Indian Law Reports, and he regularly writes blogs on professional talkies at ashishmakhija.net. He has served as a member of monitoring group of ICSI, Institute of Insolvency Professionals. And he also serves as a member of the board of advisors, Amity International Journal of Juridical Sciences, Amity Law School, Noida. He is on the advisory board of IP Foundation, a trust to facilitate and address issues in the fields of insolvency. He has significant corporate board experience and has served as an independent director in Shipping Corporation of India, Caterpillar India Limited, and other public and private limited companies. Please give a warm welcome to CA Ashish Makhija. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Vijeta ji, for a very generous introduction. And I must thank Mr. Krishna Kumar, convener, and as well as Mr. Jayesh Thakkar and other team members of JB Nagar Study Circle. I'm told that your study circle is quite active and has lots of members, and you're doing excellent programs. So I must first of all congratulate you. And also, you deserve accolades for a very simple reason that this is a subject which is quite different from what chartered accountants do. Generally, we are more interested in probably the income tax matters or maybe audit related matters or some relating to balance sheets and other things, or even bank audits. But generally speaking, or GST, of course. But generally speaking, these type of matters are not taken up at the study circle level. So I must congratulate you for being one of the first persons that recently this amendment has come, the ordinance has come, and you have taken the step towards this. So you deserve a lot of congratulations. Thank you. And also thank you for inviting me, reposing faith in me that I can handle, you see, this particular topic. Okay, so let me ask a question to the convener, a very smiling face, Mr. Krishna Kumar, that our members, I believe, are chartered accountants, but how many of them are insolvency professionals? So that then I can pace my, the discussion today or the level of the discussion, right? If they are purely insolvency professionals, I can be in an advanced level. Or if they are not insolvency professionals, then I'll have to maybe introduce from the basics.
Nearly, you can say, so 20% of the members attending
Mhm.
must be insolvency professionals.
Okay, okay. So 80% are not, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, okay, I'll deal with in that manner. Well, friends, before I start the subject today, what I need to do is I leave around, maybe I'll try to leave around 30 minutes for the question and answer session because a lot of questions are going to come on this subject. I know that. But the subject is also pretty long, so I need to cover that in detail. But before I do that, well, those who are not insolvency professionals so far, let me ask a question to you, why you have not become insolvency professional? Why you have not considered that as an alternate career? Do you think that you are at the age of 50 plus or 55 plus that you don't need to study and pass an exam? Well, friends, let's get over with that because I am always a student of law. And as Vijeta ji also mentioned just now, that I'm also doing my PhD in law. So you need to upgrade yourself all the time, isn't it? So my suggestion to those who have not become insolvency professionals so far, that please look at this option also, which is available. Well, people do ask me, even if I pass the exam, how will I get the work? There is huge scope, my dear friends. Right now, today we have 3,300 registered insolvency professionals. Out of that, almost 50% are not practicing as an insolvency professional. I know that for very clearly. So that leaves this, you see, cake only to 50% of the registered insolvency professionals. Now, you have to really, and first you pass the exam, you get yourself registered. This process is also going to take around 6 months. It's not going to happen in a day. Well, whether to register as an IP or not, you can think it later on. First, you have to cross that bridge of passing the exam and getting yourself in a position where you can get yourself registered. Or I can say you have a choice whether not to register or not to register at that stage. And then all the institutes, including Chartered Accountants Institute, they permit your CA practice along with your IP practice. So you don't have to surrender your CA certificate of practice to you see become an IP or to practice. Of course, if you handle you see work and as insolvency professional, it's a full-time job. So my suggestion is, and those who are young members here, okay, so this is also very important. Those young members, chartered accountants who have not attained the age of 28 years, because for becoming an IP to sit in the limited insolvency examination of IBBI, you need to have 10 years of membership minimum. But for youngsters who have not attained, who have not completed 10 years, and they also want to become an insolvency professional, well, friends, this will be music to your ears. Here is an option. If you have not attained the age of 28, then there is a program which has been started, graduate insolvency program by IBBI, and two institutions are conducting the program. Till now, it was only one. Now even another you see organization has been given. NLU Bhopal has also been given you see to start this course. This is a full-time residential course for only 45 students. So Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs based in Manesar, Haryana, and now of course it is being started by NLU Bhopal. So 45 more candidates. So 90 students picked up through a test and a group discussion. You will be trained thoroughly for at least 1 year. This is a 1 year residential program. Of course, nowadays it may not be residential, it may be more virtual nowadays, but otherwise it was residential. Well, friends, you will become an insolvency professional by the age of say 29 or 30. Imagine what span of career you have with you as an insolvency professional. Today, people like me, well, how long we can practice as an insolvency professional? Next 15 years, 20 years max, but not even more than 20 years. But what about you? You have a career span of 40 years or maybe 30 years, beyond 30 years of age, isn't it? So it is always better to do that. I'll just repeat the name of the institute. Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, IICA. This is in Manesar, Gurgaon, Haryana. and second is National Law University Bhopal, which has just got the approval. So they may be doing a batch, so not many people may apply because they are not aware. So do that, my dear friends. It's a fantastic career, and if you need any more guidance, I'm always available. And now to the convener of JB Nagar CP Study Circle. Well, if your members are interested in passing the limited insolvency examination, I'm sure after my saying this, probably many of you would become interested. Well, I am ready to help you in taking the modules for training them for taking limit, because limited insolvency exam is also become very tough nowadays, right? It is more a case study. I've got one of my book which has become a bestseller, analysis of cases for limited insolvency examination, and that really helps the you see aspirants also. So I am actually have a I'm a faculty for another organization, but that organization can also tie up with you for conducting the programs. This thing. So I think do that, sir. I think it will really people will really bless you that you have done this.
Right.
Okay, we'll be in touch separately on
Yeah.
on this subject. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, let us come to the topic of the day, the ordinance which has come under IBC. But before I do that, let me give you a broad, brief background about the IBC. Well, friends, why IBC was introduced, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Let me give you a very small background and then I'll move on to this topic of the day. Well, earlier, if a company was unable to pay to its creditors, the option under Companies Act 1956 and then 2013 was that a creditor who is not paid an amount of rupees 1 lakh, he could go to the High Court and ask for winding up of the company. So inability to pay debts could result in the winding up of the company. But this was not good for the country for a very simple reason, that assuming the company of a large magnitude, say Reliance or any other company, do we think that it should go into liquidation? Because those assets which have been created by such large corporations or companies, well, these are the assets not only belonging to the company, but they belong to the country, isn't it? Today, we are facing shortage of oxygen and all these corporate words, whatever industries are closed, they are also helping it. So they are the assets of the country. They are not the assets of the company alone. So no one wants that a company should go into liquidation and assets should be wasted, because putting up an industry like a steel plant or whatever, well, it takes huge amount of money and effort and time to set up those plants. So the government thought that why not create one more step before liquidation. So they thought of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. They said, we will now try to resolve the insolvency of the company. Supposing the company is insolvent, which means unable to pay its debts or has committed a default, let us create additional step before the company goes into liquidation. And the additional step is known as resolving the insolvency. That is why the process is known as corporate insolvency resolution process. So therefore, now we have to first make an attempt in reviving or rehabilitating the company. And if that attempt fails, then of course the company will go into liquidation. But let's first try, isn't it? So this is where IBC fills that gap. So now every company which makes a default, in fact, under the Companies Act, the word used was inability to pay debts. Now that inability to pay debts clause is now changed to a different format, and that is known as default now. That if any corporate debtor, and corporate debtor of course includes company as well as LLP, commits a default, and default has been defined very substantially in the IBC, it means there must be a debt, it must be due, it must be payable, and it remains unpaid. So 4 conditions are to be satisfied in case of default: debt, due, payable, unpaid. So then the company is supposed to have committed a default. And if the company commits a default up to a minimum threshold limit, which was earlier 1 lakh rupees, now it has been set at 1 crore of rupees, then either a financial creditor or an operational creditor or the corporate debtor itself can approach NCLT and say that, look, I have committed a default, please start my insolvency process. This is what exactly the scope of or the look of the IBC is there. Now, what was happening? Well, CIRPs, when they start, generally the promoters were considered as defaulters and they were ineligible under section 29A to submit their plans. So most of the promoters, or the management, they were actually losing their companies because somebody else was filing a plan and taking over the company. So this was happening. And more particularly in respect of the MSMEs, no plans were coming. Because who will file a plan for a smaller company? Like somebody is running the industry with say 2 lathe machines or 3 lathe machines doing a small scale project for some company. Well, who is interested in some such projects? Because such projects can be implemented and can be done immediately. So therefore, the idea was that for MSMEs, let there be a different solution, because out of 100% of the cases of MSMEs, 75 to 80% were actually going to liquidation and no resolution was happening. So now a thought process was, has had to come, that whether we can give a chance to MSMEs to revive themselves. Now, one option is like supposing your account becomes NPA, what you can do? Well, if you become an NPA, you can go approach the banks and go for OTS, one-time settlement. But then banks, number one, are not doing OTS. They are little afraid of doing it right now because of some vigilance inquiries, and because if they give you a haircut of say 30% or 40%, except an haircut, well, then inquiries start against them also. So no one is taking any chance. Two, they are not sure that whether the promoter is offering them correct money or not. Maybe there is more potential, isn't it? So therefore, the government thought that let us try to do something more for the MSMEs. And now let me start my presentation, and whatever your questions are there, most of your questions will be answered during the presentation. But if they are still remain unanswered, just we will have a session later on for the question answer, and I think we will be able to do this. Okay, so I think I believe my presentation is visible now. Uh, okay, so this is the first page. Let us go to, yeah. Then what happened is there is an insolvency law committee, which is a continuous committee, which is looking after the problems, solutions, and suggesting a lot of things. So subcommittee was also formed by ILC, Insolvency Law Committee, and actually they recommended. So what were their recommendations? Let's look at the recommendations first. Now, this subcommittee of ILC was formed on 24th June under the chairmanship of Dr. MS Sahu, who is the chairperson of IBBI. Public comments were invited. Report was submitted on 31st October, and the public comments were invited. And later on, then this was has been now made into the ordinance now. I mean, it's a part of the code now. Now, this is known as pre-packaged insolvency resolution process. I call it as PPIRP. Let's call it as PPIRP. Number one, it is a hybrid kind of a model where we can say it is out of court. Rather than going to the court, let us settle outside. And let us settle in a speedier manner, because time is the essence. And speedier manner means that the whole process should be completed within 90 days. Now, that is what the target is. But they have put in a lot of checks and balances, because checks and balances are important. Unscrupulous promoters should not get away just like that. If they have done fraud in the company, I think they should suffer. They should be made to suffer. They can't take advantage of committing a fraud and then coming and saying that, look, I will buy back my company at 50% discount. I think that is not the option which is available. But this, yes, of course, becomes an alternative. So, and it is not mandatory. Let's understand, PPIRP, it is an option. It is not mandatory for any company or LLP to go for it. Well, under IBs, I mean, we have court monitored processes like CIRP. Most of you must be aware what is CIRP, Corporate Insolvency Resolution Process. As I mentioned, three categories of persons can start the process, and then the process is continued for a period of 180 days. Or the second court monitored process is under section 230 to 232 of the Companies Act, where you can come out with a scheme of arrangement or compromise with the creditors. But this has not been very popular mode, because again, this requires a very high percentage of 75%. Or then there could be an out of court settlements, like there are you can go for OTS, or you can negotiate on a personal level also. So those are the things which are already available to us. But this model is, as I mentioned, it is known as a hybrid model. Hybrid model in the sense that, look, it is like an OTS, but you also get a binding nature of that formula. That means if any resolution plan is approved and there is a stamp of NCLT, now it gives, you see, the kind of, you can say the approval, and it becomes binding on all the stakeholders. It gives the credibility to that, to that extent. Or secondly, there is one more aspect to it. While you are doing, there is a moratorium which is applicable, because if you are doing a OTS, the creditors are still approaching you. You will have to still fight, you see, cases in the courts. But the moment PPIRP starts, there is a moratorium, so you get a breathing space also. You can negotiate in a manner where with a free mind. That's the kind of a thing. And here you retain the control of the company while this is happening. But in CIRP, what happens is management has to give way to the insolvency resolution professional. But here they will be in the management till the time PPIRP goes on. There are one or two circumstances when they will have to leave the management, but those are very, I would say that exceptional circumstances. So empower stakeholders to resolve the stress of the CD as a going concern. So it is like debtor in control. So the company is still in control. The existing management still retains the control of the company, and there is a minimum interference of the judiciary. So this is a very interesting model which has been brought in through ordinance only. So let me, and design principles say that basic structure of the code should be retained, which has been retained. Then no compromise of the rights of any party, and framework should have adequate checks and balances to prevent any abuse. This is exactly, some provisions have been inbuilt where the even the management is on a tight leash. I mean, you can't give a open ground or open leash to anyone, well, to bite. The point is that you have to be kept on leash. There are certain checks and balances within that framework. If you are an honest person, well, please do come forward and take the advantage, take the benefit. And of course, well, let us say that this is on a trial basis, and once this is successful, probably this may model may be replicated for even larger enterprises also. So here the creditor is in control, as I mentioned. Moratorium will remain there during resolution, and there will be a binding nature of the approved resolution. These are the three very great advantages which are there as compared to CIRP, or as compared to nothing. Because if you are, you see, in stress, financial stress, and you are running, you are begging, borrowing your working capital to run the company, well, you are in deep trouble. Why to get into that? Admit that, you see, you are in financial stress, start doing this. This is a chance. If you are unsuccessful at this, well, CIRP is still open for you. Who is stopping you to go to CIRP? So therefore, it is very important that this must be tried. And particularly, the committee thought that this is the right time because of the COVID pandemic and MSMEs under stress. So they said this is the right time to introduce PPIRP, because PPIRP is not mandatory, it is optional. It is an additional option, which actually is blending the features of both formal and informal options. So informal option is OTS, formal option is CIRP. Well, it is a combination, stands somewhere in between. Well, the committee recommended that pre-pack should be made available to for any stress, that is pre-default or post-default. But if we look at the ordinance, it is only available post-default. It is not available for pre-default. That means right now your all accounts are standard, but you think that in 1 month's time you're going to make a default. You cannot come under this. First, you have to commit a default, because default has been established as a standard under IBC. So the committee debated amongst themselves, and then it was done. And then they also recommended that it should be in respect of defaults from 1 lakh to 1 crore rupees. But there is a huge change. So don't go by this. This was only recommendation. So now the minimum threshold limit has been set, and I'll just inform you in a little while. But don't remember this part that it is for defaults between 1 lakh and 1 crore. No, it is not. Okay. Let us look at the ordinance. Now, the ordinance which has been introduced based on the recommendations, of course, and some of the recommendations of the committee have not been accepted, just like 1 lakh to 1 crore. So that has been done away with. But this ordinance is applicable with effect from 4th April. 19 new sections have been added, and a new part has been added. Earlier, IBC contained 5 parts. Now it contains 6 parts. So part 3A has been added specifically. And they are sections 54A to 54P. Right. So those are the sections which have been added. And then uh, uh, few more other sections have been added in this way. And now IBC, earlier it used to contain 255 sections when it was introduced way back in this thing. So now it has got 282 sections. In fact, friends, new part 3A has not been added. It is a chapter 3A which has been added. So I stand corrected. It is chapter 3A which has been added in part 2. It is not a new part. And then the pre-packaged rules, regulations, both of them have been notified. Now, friends, I was talking about what is the minimum threshold limit. So let me clarify that now. Section 4 of the IBC clearly states that the minimum threshold limit can be decided by the central government, and the minimum threshold limit for pre-packaged PPIRP has been pegged as 1 lakh rupees, whereas and the power has been given to the central government to increase it to up to rupees 1 crore. So this is minimum. So please mark my words, it is a minimum threshold limit. Central government has already issued a notification on 9th April where they have pegged the minimum amount of threshold default limit at 10 lakh rupees. So now let me clarify. If a default is more than 10 lakh rupees, going up to any amount, 10 lakh or more, 10 lakh, 10 lakh, 100, 10 lakh, 11 lakhs, or 11 crores, or 1100 crores. Of course, it can't be 1100 crores if it is a MSME. Obviously, it will be less than that. But what I'm saying is there is no upper limit. So minimum amount of default, which has been now pegged at 10 lakh rupees. So it is available to MSMEs, which have minimum threshold default limit of more 10 lakhs or more. So default must have been committed. And default here means a debt must be there, which has become due and payable and unpaid. So this can be started only by such organizations. Let us look at the process, an overview of the process. There are 3 stages of the process. The first stage here is known as pre-PPIRP, where you are preparing yourself. The corporate debtor is itself preparing that they want to start the PPIRP process. Second is, once they are prepared, they will move an application. So here, another thing which I want to clarify is, this option is available only to the corporate debtor. This option is not available to any creditor, including financial or operation creditor. So only a company or an LLP can start PPIRP process. They will move an application to the adjudicating authority, which means NCLT, and then NCLT will either admit it or reject it. If they admit it, then the second stage will start, which is known as PPIRP. Now the actual PPIRP takes effect from the date of passing of the admission order by NCLT. And there could be a third stage. So it is a normal thing where the management is in control. They are running the company as a going concern. So it is going on in a normal way. But there is a provision which says that if the management is not doing the correct thing, they are grossly mismanaging the company, or they are doing fraud during that PPIRP period, then the adjudicating authority can order that now the corporate debtors management will vest with the resolution professional who is appointed, because one resolution professional will definitely be appointed in the PPIRP. He is only monitoring till the time control is with the company or company's management. But if the management is shifted to the RP, it is possible. But in a rare circumstances, it will be done. In that case, that will be known as the third stage. So there are 3 stages: pre-PPIRP, where you are just preparing it. Then PPIRP starts, goes on smoothly. But if it is not going on smoothly for some reasons, then of course the management will come to the hands of the resolution professional, and then similar provisions of CIRP will become applicable out. So these are the 3 stages, and at all the 3 stages, insolvency professional is required. So first, what you need to do, let me go through very quickly. First, you check the default amount. Number 1, whether the MSME has committed a default amount. 2, if they have committed the default, what is the default amount which they have committed? So check that threshold. It must be 10 lakhs or more. Then we have another section which says that we have to check the eligibilities, and that is basically section 54A. 54A is a detailed section which gives you a lot of eligibility criteria. I'll just go to there very briefly. Let me in a short while, let me give you an overview of the process first. Then before the initiation of PPIRP, an RP is appointed. So right now we have not initiated. Initiation means filing of the application with the adjudicating authority. But we are just now in a preparatory mode. So even during this preparatory mode, RP is appointed and RP will have to render certain duties which are given in 54B. Then after everything is complete, all the conditions are satisfied. I'll tell you what those conditions are which are mentioned in 54A. Then an application for initiation of PPIRP will be filed before the NCLT and they may admit or reject. Now, if they are admitted, then there is a time limit for completion of that process, which is given in 54D. And then certain things will take place, like moratorium will kick in. There has to be a public announcement, as we know in case of CIRP. So there is a section 54A, 54E. Then once the PPIRP starts, then there are some additional duties and some powers which are given to the RP. So they are given in section 54F, right? And then in 54G, some list of claims and preliminary information memorandum, how it is to be finalized. There are separate provisions for that. 54H talks about the management of the affairs of the corporate debtor, which will be in the hands of the current promoters. And then committee of creditors will have to be constituted under section 54I. Their job is not to run the company, but just to supervise and see the process of approval of the plan. And 54J, I told you about this section. In certain circumstances, exceptional circumstances, the management of the corporate debtor can also pass to the resolution professional. So there are only two circumstances under which this can happen. But if this happens, then these are serious consequences. And then 54K, my dear friends, is the very most important section, which is, I call it as heart and soul of the whole process, where you see how the process, the approval plans will be filed, will be submitted, and will be considered by this. This is a complete process. This is a very interesting process, which is there. Little complicated, but I'll try to make it simpler for you to understand. And then once the plan is approved by the COC, it has to be filed before the adjudicating authority for approval. And then appeal can also be filed against that order. Or supposing nothing happens, then the PPIRP needs to be terminated. So there is a separate section for that. And COC can also say that PPIRP is not going very properly, or let us pass a resolution. Let us put the company into CIRP. So even COC can recommend putting the company into CIRP. So that process is given under 54O. And then once that happens, some provisions of CIRP will also become applicable. So those are 54P. And then, of course, grounds of appeals. And these are the three sections which are there. Like 65 has also been amended to include PPIRP. 67A and 77A have been added newly, just to make sure that if there is a fraudulent management during PPIRP, then those people who are doing it, they should be held responsible. And then if they submit false information in the application, or false information of the list of claims, or preliminary IM, or whatever document they are submitting to the FCs, financial creditors, or the RP, if it is false in nature, then they are liable under section 77A. So these are the checks and balances which have been mentioned, which I was mentioning about. Let's look at the few due definitions which have come now. Pre-package insolvency commencement date will be the date when it is admitted, as I mentioned, as I told you. That is given under section 54C. And then pre-packaged insolvency process cost will include any interim finance or the interest which is paid, or fees of the RP. Supposing you are appointed as an RP, your fees and expenses, well, they will be part of the PPIRP process cost. Okay. So this is the process cost which will be there. Of course, these are some additional definitions, but these are too technical right now, so I'm just skipping them. Then preliminary information memorandum. Well, I think most of my friends are aware that in CIRP, an information memorandum is to be prepared by RP so that he can invite plans. Here, since the management is on its own starting the PPIRP process, so they have been imposed a duty, cast a duty upon them that let them submit a preliminary information memorandum to the insolvency professional, to the RP. Now he will have some basis and then he will finalize that document. So his job to that extent becomes easier. So this needs to be submitted within 2 days of the commencement date. Well, some people do ask me, sir, why only 2 days have been given? It should be larger. Well, friends, this is only a formality. You are already in preparation before starting of the PPIRP. So this is PP. These 2 days have to be counted from the insolvency commencement date. So prior to that, you are already in preparation. So keep that ready. And the moment order comes, hand this over document to the RP. So I think this is not to be seen in that context. Only 2 days have been given. In fact, you have already been preparing for a long number of periods. So PPIRP period will be when it starts from PPICD, insolvency commencement date, or it ends up with approval, termination, CIRP, or liquidation. So it can result into many things, right? Termination here means that supposing no plan comes or no plan is approved by the COC within 90 days, well, then it stands terminated and the company comes back into its original place. So that is there. If it is approved, then of course it will undergo that process. And if the COC says send it to CIRP, then it can go under CIRP. Or in under two circumstances, even it can go into liquidation. So I'll cover that in a little while. But this is the process which is these are the expressions which will be used. You see, while I'm explaining section 54K, that is the approval of the resolution plan. So there will be a base resolution plan which will be submitted by the corporate debtor. This base resolution plan can be impaired or non-impaired. So if it is impaired, it will be called as IBRP. Then if they call for the plans, then they will have to evaluate those resolution plans. That will be known as ERP. Then out of the plans which are ERPs, they will compare it and they will come out with SBRP, which is significantly better resolution plan. And then if there is no SBRP, then ERP will compete with BRP and then it can become approved resolution plan, that is ARP. So these are the few acronyms probably which we'll be using during this presentation. Well, okay, let's go the process in detail. I think I've already covered as far as the default amount threshold is concerned. Minimum amount of default has been notified as 10 lakh rupees. Central government can increase the minimum amount. So I'm repeating the word minimum. It is not maximum by difference. So minimum can be increased up to rupees 1 crore. So right now it is pegged at 10 lakh rupees. Second thing which you need to do is that whether the company is been classified or the corporate debtor has been classified as MSME. Now, there are two things which are important here. The first question which may come to your mind is registration under MSME Act mandatory for the process to be started under IBC? Well, the answer is no. Here, the word which is used is that it is classified as MSME. And the classification is given under section 7 of the MSME Act. And there is a notification which has been issued recently, that is on 1st June with effect from 1st July 2020, where the categories or the classification of SMEs was changed, isn't it? 1 crore, 5 crores turnover, then 10 crores, 50 crores, and then 50 crore and 250 crores, isn't it? So for micro, small, and medium industries, the investment in plant and machinery and equipment, and the second limit is for the turnover: 1 crore, 5 crore, then 10 crore, 50 crore, and then 50 crore, 250 crores. So you have to just see that you fit in within that classification. The registration, Udyam registration, is not mandatory. Where I'm coming from, it is not clear in the code, because in fact it is clear in the code in that sense, because it says that it is classified as. So it doesn't say that you require the registration certificate. So I looked at the rules and regulations. So nothing is clear. But if you go to form number 1, which is an application for filing of for starting the CIRP the PPIRP process, now column number 8 in form that particular form, that very clearly says that attach a copy of Udyam registration or evidence of the fact that you are fitting in any of the classifications. So you have to just attach evidence to show that your turnover does not exceed that limit, or your investment in plant and machine or equipment does not exceed that threshold limit which has been stated. My suggestion would be get a certificate from a chartered accountant on this issue and attach with the application. I think that should be good enough. But I would say if you get an Udyam registration, it will be very good. But if you are not even then you see these provisions are applicable to you. And I believe that Udyam registration doesn't take much time. So if you file online, maybe within 1 or 2 days, you can get that. So now first is whether the CD has committed the default or not. So if you have not committed a default, you are not eligible. And you have to be MSME as per the classification. The second is if you should not have undergone, that means that MSME should not have undergone PPIRP or completed CIRP during 3 years preceding the initiation. So this is very, very important. There is a cooling off period. That means repeated PPIRPs cannot be done. So if you have undergone a process once, you'll have to wait for 3 more years. If you have already completed CIRP, well, again, wait for 3 years. So 3 years cooling off period has been mentioned in the law that once you have started the PPIRP process or undergone it, well, you cannot come again before the expiry of 3 years. And then not undergoing CIRP. So this is also one of the things. Not undergoing CIRP. That means if you are already undergoing CIRP, well, you cannot come under PPIRP. Not under liquidation. That means if you are going under you are into the liquidation process again, well, you cannot really start the PPIRP process. And one must be eligible to submit the resolution. CD is eligible to submit the resolution plan. So because here the CD is actually starting the process. And so therefore, CD will be submitting a base resolution plan. So therefore, the CD must be eligible to submit the plan. And eligibility, my dear friends, you are aware that there is section 29A. So even this section 54A says that the corporate debtor who is submitting the plan must be eligible under section 29A. So please look at that section and then make sure that that eligibility is there. And then what will happen? Now the process starts like this. Once you have decided, obviously informal talks will go on with the banks. Otherwise, this process cannot get started. So you have to keep them in confidence and in trust. You can't start it just unilaterally. So first, what you are going to do is you are going to approach them and ask for the name of the IP insolvency professional who will be appointed as the resolution professional. So you will be going to financial creditors and that to unrelated financial creditors. So if they are related financial creditors, well, they have no power. So first, unrelated financial creditors will propose the name of the IP to be appointed as RP in this matter. Right now, nothing has started. So it is just the first step. After checking the eligibility and everything, now this is the second step which is to be followed. Then the financial creditors, which are having 10% or more of the total financial debt, now they may propose the name of an IP. So if there are, say, 5 financial creditors having more than 10% of the financial debt, well, all of them are entitled to propose that. So let the names come. Maybe 5 names may come, or 2 names, 3 names, whatever names come. Then after that, the CD is supposed to convene a meeting of the unrelated FCs. And this meeting can be physical meeting or a virtual meeting, the electronic meeting, that is also permitted. But the meeting is required. And in the meeting, out of these, whatever names have come, one name will be selected for approval of, to be approved by the financial creditors with 66% vote. Well, there is a process that notice is to be sent in particular form number P2, minimum notice is 5 days. Shorter notice is also possible. It should give the date, time and venue of the meeting along with a list of the creditors and the amount due. That is also to be given to the FCs. Then unrelated financial creditors will approve any one name with a minimum 66% majority in value of the financial debt. And if there are no financial creditors or no unrelated financial creditors, then the ball goes towards unrelated operational creditors to propose and approve. Then they are going to be proposing it and then they will be approving it. So CD has no right to propose or no right to appoint anyone as an IP. So the ball, first of all, lies in the court of, because IFC said that, look, we should have a confidence in that person. So approval of the terms of the RP, whatever the term, whatever his appointment terms are there. So a particular form is there, form P3. Then there has to be a declaration to be given. Now this is also important. Now this is the second phase now. After the name is approved, now the corporate debtor has to do many things. First, they will have to give a declaration, and that declaration is to be given in particular form, Form P6. What type of declarations are there? Number one, CD will file the application for PPIRP indefinite time period. So now they will have to mention in their declaration that how much time they are going to file this application. They'll have to commit themselves. 30 days, 60 days, 45 days, but maximum period they can get is 90 days, not exceeding 90 days. So look at this, pre-PPIRP period is 90 days. So you are actually preparing for the PPIRP. So the management will say, okay, I need 45 days to file this application. Well, that's all right. Number two, PPI, they have to also will have to give a declaration that this PPIRP is not to defraud any person. Third, name of the IP has been proposed and approved. So because that is the first process which you have to complete. And then corporate debtor within this period will have to pass special resolution. Or 3/4 of the total partners, if it in case of LLP, they must approve the filing of the application. So these processes have to be gone through. That is why you need some time to before you file. So now CD will provide declarations. As I mentioned to you earlier, 3 types of declarations: special resolution, and then also a base resolution plan. So during this period, keep that ready. BRP also, base resolution plan. Then again, a meeting will be called of the unrelated financial creditors. And then now they will approve whether the company is allowed to file PPIRP at this stage or not. So whether an application can be moved or not. This is only an approval for filing application. They are not approving the BRP at this stage. They are just giving a go ahead. Okay, you go and file this application. We are with you. This is what I told in many of the seminars, that you will have to start building trust between you and the lenders. If the company is not building trust, well, then of course the bankers will not permit you. But obviously, lending money, getting money is always a matter of trust. So, and I know many companies who are maintaining very good relationships with the banks and the financial institutions, disclosing whenever things are to be disclosed. So keep them in trust. I think they are going to help you. And the mindset of the banks will also change over a period of time, right? So the approval will be given in form number P4, and then the same process of the meeting will be followed. Like the meeting which is being followed in, you see, at the time of the approval of the name, so same process will be followed. 5 days notice, shorter notice, and whatever meeting and agenda and everything is to be given. Now, once you see the approval is given for the filing of the application, now the job of RP will start from this date. Till that time, he was not doing anything. It was the CD which was doing all the things. Now he will prepare a report in form number P8. There is a specific report form number which has been given. Now what he will say, number one, he will actually check the eligibility of the CD. That means a minimum threshold limit, default committed, and then eligibility requirement insofar as given in section 54A. That you are an MSME and everything, you are not undergoing CIRP, you are not into liquidation, CRP was not completed in the past 3 years, and so on and so forth. So whatever is written in law, they will have to be checked by this. And then he will also give a report saying that base resolution plan conforms to the requirements of the law. And all these reports, of course, filing has to be done on the e-platform of IBBI. And then his duties will continue from the date of his appointment till the time the application is made or the period expired. Supposing CD took 90 days time, but within 90 days, supposing they don't do or any other thing, they do not come out with BRP or they do not file anything, well, then his duty is over, the matter is over. But if they file the application, then till the time that application is decided by the adjudicating authority, his duties will continue. So RP continues either the period expires, number one, or PPIRP application which is filed is either admitted or rejected. So this is the first stage. The application, of course, has to be made by a CD only, and that is form number 1 is given, and you have to go to the rules to see that form. That's a long form. And you have to attach declarations as a CD, special resolution, and approval of the financial creditor, because they are all documented. Even the approval of the FCs is also in a particular form. So everything has to be attached along with the name and consent of the RP. Supposing the same RP is willing to continue, well, he will give his consent, or any other RP's consent will be taken. then this is one of the another declaration which is to be given by the corporate debtor at this stage. And some people feel that this is a non-starter. I do not feel so. They say that declaration regarding existence of avoidance transactions. Here the CD has to confirm on its own that there are no, either there are no avoidance transactions or there are some avoidance transactions. So they have to come out clean. Now, if there are, you see, an instance of the avoidance transactions, and I think my friends are aware what is meant by avoidance transactions. We have a, you see, separate set of sections which we call it as PUFE transactions, right? Preferential, undervalued, fraudulent, and extortionate credit transactions, which are from sections 43 to 51. And then there are two more sections, 66 and 67, which talk about fraudulent or wrongful trading. So they will have to give an undertaking or a declaration. A, either it does not exist, or B, if it exists, then they will have to give the details of it. So they'll have to be, they'll have to come out, you see, clean to this respect. So this is extremely important. So now, what I suggest is that prior to making such an application, I think it will be good if the CD itself can get the forensic audit conducted and get sure that look whether this transaction exists or not. And let me tell you, my dear friends, even if there are avoidance transactions which are there, that does not stop you or that does not stop adjudicating authority from starting the PPIRP process. Rather, you are coming out clean, saying that, look, because preferential transactions are those transactions which may be unintentional. Undervalued transactions may be unintentional. So there is no intention involved in these. But you were forced because the circumstances were there. Now you are in financial stress. You want to sell one of your spare land, but the market, whole market knows that you are in financial stress. Will you get the full value? The answer is no. So and you had to sell it because you needed money as a working capital. So even if you sell it at a lower price or an undervalued price, there was no bad intention of doing it. So there is no harm even if such a transaction is there and you put it in the form, nobody is going to have a negative view of it. But only thing is there has to be a disclosure. So if there are no transactions, well, that will be wonderful. But if there are transactions, obviously, then you will have to point out. So come out clean. I think this is a chance to come out clean. Okay. But if you have done frauds and other thing, then of course it's a difficult situation. Then there's absolutely a different situation. Then the whole word changes on its own head. Then information relating to the books of CD and everything will be provided in that application. Then adjudicating authority gets to approve or reject that application within 7 days. Well, we may laugh at the number of days because 7 days is too short. And in circumstances, we are seeing that adjudicating authorities are not approving or rejecting the applications for a long time. But here, this is possible. Why? Number one, there is a report of the insolvency professional. So they can take advantage of that report. So they don't need not go into the greater details of checking eligibility because that has been certified by IP. Number one. Number two, this application is not contested. In section 7 or 9, the notice comes to CD, it is a contest between, there is a dispute which could arise. But here, there is no question of any dispute or controversy which is there. So therefore, these such applications can be decided faster. Yeah, only thing is that adjudicating authorities have to hold hearings, have to put up these applications and they have to list these applications. But I believe 7 days is too tight. But yes, if it happens, well, it will be very good for all of us. Then once the application is admitted, that date is known as pre-packaged insolvency commencement date. Now the insolvency is commencing from that date. Now this is a very date which is sacrosanct because it turns, many things turn on its head from this date. And then declarations, special resolutions and approval of FCs and everything are filed. And PPIRP completion period is 120 days. So this is the shorter period. This is the time bound manner. In CIRP, friends, we know that we get 180 days plus, of course, 90 days extension plus 60 days you get for the legal issues also. So almost around 330 days. And even if you look at the statistics given by IBBI, well, 400, more than 378 days is the average time that the CIRPs are taking. Average, that is average. So some CIRPs are going on for even 2 years. Anyhow, but this is, you see, a very ambitious target. I know that. 120 days and 120 days is divided into two parts, friends. 90 days are given from the date of PPICD to the corporate debtor and the COC and the RP, all the three stakeholders who are involved here, that you complete the whole process and file the application for approval of the plan before the adjudicating authority. So you get 90 days time. 30 days time is given to the adjudicating authority to approve the plan. So it is not 120 days. In fact, I will call it as 90 days only. Because 30 days is given to adjudicating authority. It is not with the CD. It is not with the COC. So COC and CD will have to complete with the help of the RP to complete the entire process of PPIRP in 90 days. Well, some people may ask me that again, this is a very tight timeline. Yes, I agree. I don't deny that. But then, since you have already prepared well, you have already spoken to the bankers, well, I think this is possible to a larger extent. Okay. So RP will submit the approved resolution plan within 90 days. This is what I was talking about. And the law simply says that if the plan is not filed for approval within 90 days, then an application will be filed by the RP for termination of PPIR. No option to him. So this limit is sacrosanct and this time limit cannot be extended. There is no provision so far. But whether some exclusions can take place or whether the NCLTs will use their power under Rule 11 of the NCLT rules or not, we don't know. They may do so. But right now, let us assume that it is 90 days, which is sacrosanct. And then, of course, once the PPIRP start, moratorium kicks in, just like in case of CIRP. So same provisions are there, like 14.1 and 14.3 will also apply in these circumstances. Then obviously the NCLT will, while starting the IRP process, they will also be appointing the RP. Either the same RP can be appointed or some new person can come in. And then he will make a public announcement. This public announcement is different from CIRP in the sense that he's only going to announce that companies under PPIRP. Here, we are not inviting claims because here the list of claims is to be submitted by the corporate debtor itself, right? So that process is shortened. And moratorium period is starting from PPICD and going up to the end of PPIRP. And end of PPIRP can be anything. It can be termination, it can be approval, it can be CIRP, it can be liquidation order. So there are 4 circumstances is possible. Then RP has to conduct the PPIRP and duties of the powers and powers of RP are defined, very well defined. Well, this is the role of RP. First, the list of claims will be submitted by CD to corporate debtor. There is a specific form P10 within 2 days of PPICD. That means the moment the order is passed within 2 days, along with the BRP, along with the preliminary IRP, all the 3 things will be submitted by the CD to the RP. Now the role of RP starts from here. First, his job is to see whether the list of claims which is given by the CD is correct or not. He's not inviting claims, but he is now writing back to all the creditors, either through email or maybe by speed post because the manner is not specified. So I'll suggest doing both the things and write to them, inform them. If they have any objection, they have been given 7 days time to submit their objections. He will consider the objections and he will update, RP will call evidence, consider every objection of the creditor and then update the list of claims in form number P10. So this is his first job, right? Now he is only verifying the claims. I mean, not verifying, he is considering the objection and then updating the claims. So there is no verification involved. So his list is taken as it is. But if any objection comes, then he has to deal with it. Otherwise, he will presume that whatever is given by CD is correct. So this is the way he has to handle the things. So his job is to that extent is little limited. And then what he is supposed to do? Now he is basically, consider him like a monitor. He is not there to run the affairs of the company. He is just monitoring the management of the affairs of the city. Because the management is being done by the promoters itself. Then he has got a duty to attend the board meetings and the committee meetings. And he has the duty to inform the creditors if there is any breach under IBC. So something is wrong, which is going on, which is breaching the IBC, then of course he can inform the creditors. And then he will constitute the COC. Now this is another job of his. He has to constitute the committee of creditors. And committee of creditors, my dear friends, will be selected out of the list of claims submitted by CD. So no time wasted because the list is already there. You will constitute because within 7 days you need to constitute. And then if you are updating after the objection, then you will update. You will keep on updating the list of the COC. COC will undergo a change after the objections are considered. But that will not affect the decisions which have been taken by earlier COC. And then he will also have to finalize. So one was relating to the claims. Second comes in relation to the COC. Third job is he has to finalize the information memorandum now. A preliminary IM is given to him. He will have to check and confirm the details which are mentioned are right, and then he will have to do it. So obviously his job becomes little easier because he is already given a base document. In CIRP, he had to start from the base, from zero base rather. So here he has got some base to start with. So this has to be done, right? And then this is another responsibility that he will have to file the application for avoidance transactions. Now here again comes very tight limits. The tight limits are basically relating to, I call it as ODF. ODF means opinion. He has to form an opinion, and that opinion is to form in 30 days. Then second is D stands for determination, and he has to determine whether these transactions exist or not within 45 days. F stands for filing of the application. That has to be done within 60 days. So 30, 45, 60 model is there, as opposed to 75, 115, and 135 under CIRP. So in CIRP, he has to form an opinion within 75 days, determine in 115 days, and file application within 135 days. But here the time limits are very, very tight. So therefore, my advice is to get the forensic audit done from day one itself. Do not wait for it, so that you are able to achieve these targets. And of course, a lot of disclosures are to be made and records are to be preserved. And those filings are to be filing of certain reports and forms, which all IPs are doing it. So I don't have to really deal with this. And then obviously we'll have to make announcement, also public announcement as we mentioned. But the time limit is again very tight, 2 days of PPICD. Then after constituting, he'll have to hold the meetings, COC meetings. He will also have to appoint registered valuers, 2 registered valuers, as in the case of CIRP. Then if the COC tells him to invite resolution plans, then he will invite it. So it is not that in every case he has to invite it. It is in certain circumstances, which I'll deal in a little while. And then he will move an application for approval of the plan. There is a separate form. And if the process needs to be terminated, like no plan comes or no plan is approved, well, in that case, you see termination application, there is a separate form which is attached. He has got a lot of powers for doing his duties. He can access all books of accounts, records, and information because he has to finalize IM. He has to update the list of claims also, so he needs access. And then he has also to file avoidance application. He can access records with information utility. I think those who are not aware what is information utility is an authority established under IBC specifically, where they have the record of the debts and everything. And then he will have the access of the books of accounts with the government authority. Now this must be again music to your ears, friends, because here the IP who is appointed, he can even write to the income tax department to get whatever documents are available with them. So he can write to the GST department, ESI, PF, or whatever department he wants. So he can get all the information from them. So the process is now reversed. You are writing to income tax department to comply. And then obviously, this is one of his powers also, rather it's duty also to attend board and committee meetings. So both the things are there. Of course, it is mentioned in powers in that, but I consider it as a duty also. And then he can also appoint accountants, legal and other professionals. He has to collect certain information. Obviously, he has to collect information about avoidance transaction also and fraudulent or wrongful trading. And he has to collect this information for 2 years prior to PPICD. So the look back period in this case is 2 years. Okay. And banks will also cooperate with the RP if he wants any information or bank statement. Well, banks will have to furnish that data. The company's employees will must cooperate. If they don't, then he can move an application just similar to what we do in CIRP, because the provisions of 19.2 and 19.3 apply mutatis mutandis to these provisions also. And of course, you see, one is really concerned about the fees. Now here, 2 regulations are very important, regulation 8 and 14, because this has been a problem. Insolvency professionals appointed as IRPs, well, fees is to be ratified by the COC. So today they work in good faith, believing that they will be paid say 3 lakhs or 5 lakhs a month. But later on, COC ratifies it at a very low amount, say 1 lakh or 50,000. well, then he is struggling to recover his or her fees. But here comes a very good provision. Now, here it says that look, once you have a meeting of the financial creditors unrelated, where your name is approved, now they will have to sign a particular form, which is, I believe, is form number P3, which is like a engagement letter. In that table, it is mentioned that his fees will be decided, and for all the three stages: pre-PPIRP, then PPIRP starts and no vesting is done, and third is where the vesting of management also is done with the IRP. So IP. So therefore, there are three stages, and those three stages fees will also be decided differently, and that has to be mentioned in that form, duly signed by the financial creditor. So this is one security, or I would say ring fencing, which the RPs are getting now, which is a very good provision. Then in regulation 14 also, it says that fees for the three types of has to be decided. And then another provision in regulation 8 says that if the supposing the company does not file PPIRP within the time limit, because they're getting time limit, then they say that the entire fees will be borne out of the funds of the corporate debtor. So CD is responsible to it. So there is no confusion that who is going to pay the fees. And another provision in Regulation 8 also says that a separate bank account has to be maintained where the fees and the expenses will have to be deposited as indicated by the COC. Well, this is a very good provision. So at least now you have a safety that look, your money is safe. It is put it in the separate bank account, and that money can be paid if the PPRP is successful or a failure, whatever the circumstances could be. So these are the two good provisions which have happened, but only inconsistency is somewhere in the code it is written that prior to PPIRP, whatever expenses and fees are there, they will have to be ratified by the COC. Now that becomes a little problem. Once financial creditors who are not COC, but they were having an informal kind of meeting, they decide one fees, and in the COC, because same people will be there, and tomorrow if they don't ratify, then what will happen? Well, I believe I believe and I'm confident in believing that once you see in an informal meeting, if the financial creditors have decided one fees, obviously they'll have to stick by it. I mean, they will have to ratify it. But there is a provision for ratification. Well, that could have been done away with. But anyhow, or it could have simply said that any fees decided by the so and so will be treated as passed by the COC. That would have been a better thing. So I think that issue consistency can be brought in. Otherwise, again, there will be a confusion if it is not ratified, because they say they may impose limits and conditions. And COC, prior to the constitution of COC, whatever fees and expenses are there, they are subject to ratification. Well, to that extent, ratification is fine, but if they don't ratify, then what will happen? That's the problem. That is what I'm mentioning about. Okay, so these things I've already covered, so I'll just skip them. Let us go to, yeah, this is the management of the CD will lie in the hands of the board of directors or the partners. So obviously, if they are running the management, they will run it as a going concern. They will protect and preserve the value, and they will also continue to discharge the contractual and statutory obligations like TDS deposit or balance sheet filing or whatever has to be done. They will continue to do that. It will not be the responsibility of the RP to do it, because he's only there as a monitor. COC has to be constituted within 7 days. First meeting is to be done within 7 days of constitution, and he can update the COC from time to time. I think I've already covered this. Now there is one provision where the vesting of the company can come to the hands of the RP. Number one, what are the conditions? Let's understand that first. And this is a serious provision, 54J. It says COC, first of all, will have to decide with 66% voting share. Second, not only that, adjudicating authority, then the application has to go to adjudicating authority, because it can't be on the decision of the COC. COC is only giving a kind of an approval first, and then, or deciding first. Then it goes to the adjudicating authority, and adjudicating authority will pass an order for vesting of the management in the hands of the RP only if and only if, number one, either the affairs of the corporate debtor are being conducted in a fraudulent manner, or there is an or in between, or there is a gross mismanagement of the affairs of the CD during PPIR. Only under any of these two circumstances, then the vesting of the management can be directed by the AA from the management, from the existing promoters to the RP. Otherwise, it will not happen. So this is only an exceptional circumstances. Okay, COC does not have the power, but they have to first decide on this. And if the vesting order is done, then of course many other sections will become applicable, because now the management will be, as a going concern, will be done by the RP only. So all those sections of CIRP, some of those sections have been made applicable here, right? Now let me take you to the approval of the plan. So this is, you see, a process which starts. Let us understand it briefly, and then I will open it for question and answer session. So let me devote around 15-20 minutes on this. How the process will work. Now COC, everything has been constituted. Now the process has to start. So now the process is like this. The corporate debtor will first submit a plan which is known as BRP. It has to submit within 2 days. It is already mentioned. Obviously, it will be ready. So they will submit base resolution plan. Now, base resolution plan can be submitted by the CD individually, alone, or jointly with any other party. That means you can get hold of any investor, you can get hold of any private equity fund, you can get hold of any joint venture partner, whatever it is. Find out, because you may be under financial stress, but somebody is likely to support you. So get hold of that if it is possible, or submit your own resolution plan. This is known as BRP, base resolution plan. Now, two things. Once the base resolution plan is submitted to RP, RP will present it to COC. Obviously, in a COC meeting, COC can say, look, your base plan is right, but we want some improvement in this. Please submit revised BRP. So a revised BRP can also be submitted. Now, whether BRP or revised BRP, whatever it is. Now, again, there are two situations. Does it contain impairment? Does it not contain impairment? Impairment here is to be considered impairment to the debts outstanding or the claims of the operational creditors. Here the word is operational creditors. Please remember this phrase. So if you are saying in a plan that, look, financial creditors, I'm going to pay you 70% of your debt, and that too over a staggered period. But to the OCs, I'm going to pay 100%. If I am committing to pay them 100% in the ordinary course of business, just as the business is going on, then it is considered as there is no impairment to the OCs. So impairment means even a single rupee impairment, lesser than money, less money which you are paying, is known as impairment here. So then now they have got a chance. BRP or revised BRP, first condition, no impairment to OC debts. COC may approve it. Again, it is may. So please understand, may or may not approve it. If they approve it, matter ends. Application is filed to the adjudicating authority for approval, finish. And once their approval comes, the PPRP package will have to be implemented. So this is, and I believe almost in 60 to 70, 60% or at least 50% of the cases, this is going to happen. Do that if you want to be successful. Because you get an advantage of moratorium, you get an advantage of a stamp of adjudicating authority, and you get a freedom of your mind so that you can do your business in a proper manner. And of course, in OTS, this is the same thing happens. In OTS also, the financial creditors give a small haircut, and OCs are not given haircut because OCs are not party, because it's a private negotiation, isn't it? So it is just like that, but here you are getting an advantage. This is one of the important things. Number two, if there is an impairment to the OCs, now the process will start and move further. Then the COC cannot approve it in the first stage. It's not that COC cannot approve it at a later stage, but at this stage, they will not approve it. Okay, so I think I'm clear on this. What will happen? Then they will ask the RP to invite the prospective resolution applicants. That means now we are getting the plans from outside. So either the BRP is not approved. One is, so let's go back again. BRP submitted or revised BRP submitted. No impairment, still not approved. Impairment cannot be approved. Now, in both the circumstances, the COC will ask or request the RP to invite PRA. So under both these circumstances, whether the BRP not approved or if there is an impairment to any of the OCs, I'm here only talking about OCs at this moment. Later on, some different things come. Then RP will invite plans. Then those plans, when they plan those come, he will obviously present it to the COC for evaluation. Here, regulation 42 is very important. it talks about evaluation, basis for evaluation. The word which is used is basis for evaluation. We may call it as evaluation matrix or whatever. So COC will lay down what is the basis for evaluation. So on that basis of evaluation, then they will pick up one plan, the best plan out of the plans which have been received. This plan, my dear friends, will be known as Evaluated Resolution Plan, ERP. Let's call it as ERP. Now, if now this ERP which is selected, it will be now compared with BRP. And now COC will see whether ERP is significantly better than BRP. If it is significantly better, then COC may select the significantly better resolution plan. We call it as SBRP now for approval. So let me recapitulate back again. BRP is there. If approved, very good. If not approved or impaired, then they will call for the plans. Then whatever resolution plans come, COC will evaluate against the evaluation basis, which they have also fixed. And on that basis, they will select one plan as ERP. This is a selection process. There is no approval right now. It is S1, selection 1. Then they will compare that ERP with the BRP, and they will find out whether it is significantly better or not. There is a separate significantly better criteria, which also again they will have to establish. Let me give you an example. I think it will become easier. Supposing while evaluating, they are giving a score. So BRP, assuming gets a score of 75. Right, based on upfront payment, based on whatever other criteria, qualitative and quantitative criteria. But the ERP, say, gets 80 points, the highest one. Now, significantly, criteria, they will have to decide along with the basis for evaluation, and they may say that that ERP will become SBRP if it is 10 points better than BRP. But here now we are seeing that it is only 5 points better. So it does not become SBRP. Now, supposing the ERP gets a score of say 86, which is now 11 points better. So obviously it becomes now SBRP. Now here also again, they may select, it is not mandatory. So they may select, this is a second selection process. So from you see ERP, the plan may become SBRP, or it may remain as only ERP. Right, so that is the second solution. Second stage is there. Now, if SBRP is not there, supposing it is not significantly better, now the ERP which was selected, it will now compete with BRP. This is a competition, and this is basically known as kind of with the process of Swiss challenge which is there. So based on competition, ERP or BRP will now become FARP. That means for approval. It will be selected for approval, right? Okay, selected for approval. So FARP. This is the third selection. So first selection was ERP, second selection was SBRP, third election is competition between ERP and BRP, and now you select any one plan for approval. Right now it is not approved. Then COC may or may not approve that plan, and that if they approve it, then that becomes ARP, known as approved resolution. So this is the whole process, friends. Okay, it looks to be a little complicated, but I think it's easier. Let's understand the acronyms once again. Plan by the CD will be known as BRP or revised BRP. It can be impaired or it cannot be. It can be without impairment. Then the first selection process will give us ERP. Second selection process may give us SBRP, and third selection process will give us the for approval resolution plan, FARP. And the fourth process, when it is approved, that will give us approved resolution plan. So 3 selections and 1 approval later on. Okay, so I hope I'm able to clarify this thing. Now, one more aspect which I want to bring in before I close this session and then leave it open for the questions. Now, if BRP becomes ARP after competition and contains impairment of any claim owed by CD, or let us assume one more thing. Initial BRP contains impairment to financial creditors, but does not contain an impairment to the operational creditors. And at that stage itself, BRP can be approved. right? So it is only the condition at that stage is there should not be any impairment to OC's claims. FC's claim can be impaired in the first stage itself. So they can that can be approved also. But if that plan is approved, or later on, after a competition between BRP and ERP, supposing BRP becomes ARP, but it contains the impairment of any claim. Here the word is any claim owed by the CD. Now here comes any claim, including the financial creditors also. Then what is the condition? COC may, please mark the word may. It is not mandatory, because people are under confusion that it is mandatory. No, COC may require the CD to dilute its shareholding, voting, or control over the corporate debtor. That means control means now your share or voting percentage has to come down less than 50%. So controlling interest has to pass on to somebody else. They may require. Now, if supposing they can still pass it without the dilution also. This is also mentioned. Committee of creditors can still approve without dilution for reasons to be recorded. So it's not that it can't be approved. So let's try to understand. First, BRP submitted no impairment to OCs, but contains impairment to FCs, can be approved at the first stage itself. Or if it contains impairment, then it goes through the process of competition, and then it may become a winner, because there will be a competition between BRP and ERP. And if the BRP is approved with impairment to any claim, then the COC may ask the corporate debtor to dilute, but they may still approve it without dilution for the reasons to be recorded. And I believe in 90% of the cases, this is going to happen, because the faith in the management is there by the, it's like an OTS. So I don't think they will be doing like this. Now, what will happen is after this, RP will submit the approved plan to the adjudicating authority, and adjudicating authority can give its stamp. So even a plan with impairment without dilution can still be approved by the adjudicating authority. But there is only one instance. Now, people are a little confused, so let me clarify. That is very, very important. This is, of course, this is an explanation. This says CD may submit the BRP either individually or jointly, which I have already explained. And then claims are considered as impaired where the resolution plan does not provide for full payment of the confirmed claims. So even a single rupee less payment is considered as impairment. Now, obviously, adjudicating authority has to get 30 days. I explained that. And they will also make sure that there is effective implementation. Now, there is one condition which is important. This is very important. You remember that I told you that there could be a vesting order which could be passed under two circumstances: conducted in a fraudulent manner, or gross mismanagement is there after COC approves it with 60 days. That is only exceptional circumstances. And I'm believing that it is going to happen only in not more than 5% of cases, because even the time is very short to prove this. But if that happens, supposing the adjudicating authority passes an order during PPI-RP that let the management now be handed over to RP, and coupled with a BRP, which becomes an ARP, but does not result in the change in management or control of CD. If these two conditions are there, then adjudicating authority has to reject that plan, terminate PPI-RP, and order liquidation. So this is one situation. But let us understand once again. Number one, it is mandatory that a vesting order has been passed, and there is a condition. That means the second condition now. Second condition is that if the you see ARP does not approve resolution plan, does not result in change in management or control of CD. Because COC can approve it, do you know that, right? But if there is a vesting in the management, then if the COC, even if it approves it, then there is a trouble. Then the adjudicating authority has to mandatorily reject it, terminate the PPI-RP, and order liquidation. So these are severe consequences. So vesting order has a serious consequences. Otherwise, it is a simple and a plain vanilla process. It's not difficult to follow that. Okay. So this is about termination. Yeah. So I think, and there is one more situation. Supposing no plan comes or no plan is approved, and the company and the process is to be terminated. So termination application is filed, but there was a vesting order passed. If both the conditions are satisfied, then again the company will go into liquidation. So please remember that if the vesting order is passed, and if the plan does not change the management, and the PPIRP or the PPIRP is terminated, then the company is definitely going into liquidation. COC cannot decide to send it to liquidation. It is only the adjudicating authority which will have to send it into liquidation under these two circumstances. So vesting order is the prominent thing here. Okay. So this is one. And then CIRP can also be started in PPIRP's cases where COC decides with 66% that, look, let us send the company to CIRP, provided it is eligible. I mean, if it is not eligible, then obviously it can't be sent. So it will be deemed as an order under Section 7, and the whole process of CIRP will start. RP will become the IRP, and the date of ICD, you see, will be considered as the date of order when the CIRP is done that. Okay. So I think, yeah, this is a small recapitulation. Let's do that. BRP or revised BRP, if does not impair claims of OCs, may be approved, may not be approved. BRP or revised BRP, if it contains impairment, then COC will ask RP to invite PRS, evaluate PRS, select ERP. If ERP is SBRP based on your criteria, which is to be determined by the COC, select it for approval. And if you don't select or there is no SBRP, then ERP will compete with BRP. And SBRP, if selected, may be approved, or if there is no SBRP, then better of ERP or BRP may be selected for approval, then it also may be approved. So I think this is the whole process which is there. It's little slightly complicated, but I think I've tried to make it much easier. So I'll just stop here because I think we are able to cover it in 1 hour and 30 minutes. I'll just stop here and hand it over to Mr. Krishna or any other person who will maybe we can take up few questions now, because I believe there are a lot of questions coming up in the chat.
Yes, yes. Now I request Vijeta ji to share her screen for the question answer.
Thank you, Krishna ji. I'm just sharing the screen. So these are the questions which have arisen during the session. I've just copied and pasted it here. Okay. Makhija ji, you can take it up. Please.
Yeah, sure. Can a CD make payment of creditors pertaining to prior PPIRP period in its routine during PPIRP period, or the claims are released and fees like in CIRP? My dear friend, they are not freeze like in CIRP because the company is running and they can continue to make payment in the ordinary course of business, right? When I'm saying ordinary course means in the routine, but if they are preferring somebody against the other, then there could be a problem. So therefore, because then it will be considered as a fraud also. So let's not do that. In the ordinary course, all statutory and contractual obligations can continue. There is a specific provision in the law itself. What is the impairment of claim of OC apart from monetary loss in absolute terms? Impairment is, I told you that if the 100% of the claim is not paid, supposing you are 100 rupees is due and the CD is proposing to pay you say 90 rupees. So this is an impairment. I mean, if BRP provides for payment of OC dues after 3 months from the due date, will it be considered as impairment? That's a good question. Well, if you are making a payment, say on a deferred basis, well, that may not be considered as an impairment. It is only a delay which is there. Well, because here there is no concept of net present value, isn't it? I mean, I'm only deferring. Supposing I'm saying that I've got, say, 10 crores as my operational creditors, and I tell them that, look, I'm going to pay you 10 crores, but I will pay you within the next 6 months or 1 year. Well, that is fine. I mean, that is not considered as impairment as per explanation 2, which you have already pointed out, because explanation 2 clearly says it is only in respect to the amount, not to the time period. Good question though. Yes. Can you repeat those 2 institutes? I think I've already repeated at that time. It is National Law University, Bhopal, and Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs. These are for the young professionals. Okay, do that, and you will really give credit to me after some time. Okay, I know that. How can we find the names of the corporates who are under IBRP? Okay, what is IBRP, my dear friend? It is either under CIRP or PPIRP. Well, if you want to find out the names of the companies which are under CIRP or PPIRP, well, a public announcement is made, and all public announcements are posted on IBBI's website. So there is a special link which is there. You will have to go through all the public announcements, or rather, what I suggest is go to IBBI's website. There is a column to subscribe. You subscribe. So whenever a new public announcement is made, you will get an email, or maybe at the end of the day, you will get an email that today 5 announcements were published. So I think that's the best way of doing it.
Question number 4 is a request to Ashish ji. It's a personal request. Ashish ji, you can make a note of it.
Yeah,
And
can you kindly share
we can
more
skip to
information
question number
about?
5.
Okay. Can you highlight the percentage ratios of successful IBRP applications? Well, my dear friends, I'm not understanding what do you mean by IBRP. If you are talking about the base resolution plan or impaired base resolution plans, if you are talking about that, well, right now it is a new provision which has come only on 9th April, isn't it? 4th April ordinance and 9th April rules and regulations. So we have not seen much of the application so far. So I think in times to come, we will be able to tell you. So the CIRP limit stands at 1 crore. Yeah, so let's not get confused. CIRP limit is 1 crore. That means minimum amount of default for the purpose of CIRP is 1 crore. But for the purpose of MSMEs to come under PPIRP, it is 10 lakh rupees. I hope I'm clear on this.
Yes.
Is default means only one single default for one day above the threshold limit? Well, friends, default is a default. But the point is, like supposing you are saying default for one day. I mean, you committed a default and then you corrected it. If you have already corrected it, then there is no default today. But if you have, say, committed yesterday a default, well, that is a default till the time it continues. If you have already made good, then I don't think it is considered as a default. You can't go back in the history and say, I committed default, say 5 months back. But if you have already corrected it, I think then it is not considered as a default. Okay. Okay. Then CD or IP approaches either way for PPIRP. Base plan is prepared, say X days, then the process PPRP is initiated. Can the same IP be as appointed as RP? Yes, sir. He can be appointed. There is no problem in that. Rather, that is more advantageous because he knows the ins and outs, right? Can same ERP be appointed in the formal process initiation of PPIRP who helped in the preparatory work? Will it not be a conflict? See, there are two things. Let us understand this. One is you are appointed by the bankers because unrelated FCs have proposed your name. Then you are an independent person. You are not helping the CD. You are just rather checking what they have submitted. But if you are giving a consultancy to CD separately, well, then you can't become an RP. I hope I'm clear on this. So it is only if the financial creditors in their meeting propose your name and approve your name, then you are considered as an independent person because you are not assisting the CD. You are assisting in the whole process of PPIRP. There is no conflict of interest. But if you are assisting the CD separately, like supposing somebody comes to me and says, Mr. Makhija, can you help me in making the BRP or the list of claims, the other thing, then I cannot be appointed as the, RP in that. I hope I'm clear on this. Okay. Yeah, so I think this is covered. Is the default amount of 10 lakhs per creditor or over default? Well, it is only it can be overall also, it can be to single creditor also because nothing is mentioned. Well, in the case of CIRP, you are aware that joint default to the financial creditors can also trigger Section 7 application. But in case of OCs, obviously it can't be joint, it has to be individual. But here, nothing is mentioned. They are only talking about default and a threshold limit. So I believe it is a combined default of 10 lakh rupees, including FCs, including OCs. Okay. IBBI mentioned in one of their webinar that Udyam registration is mandatory. Better a clarification is issued. Well, I don't know which seminar you are referring to, but let me tell you, there was a webinar which was conducted on 9th April itself by our Institute of Chartered Accountants IPA, triple IP. Well, I was present and I was one of the speakers in that, where one of the whole-time directors of IBBI was also present, and we held it between 2 and 4. I raised this point that this is not clear whether the registration is mandatory or not, because it simply talks about classification. Then the whole-time member who was present, he said, I have the copy of the draft regulations in my hand, and according to me, so Udyam registration is mandatory. Then we believed him that yes, probably because we didn't have the copy because the regulations were not out. In fact, he said that regulations will be out in next 2 hours, and they were out by 8 p.m. in the night. But when I looked at the rules and regulation, I found that go to form number 1, my dear friend, look at column number 8. It says Udyam registration, or there is a word or in between, and it says evidence relating to classification of MSME. So therefore, I would say it is not mandatory. Of course, any clarification which it comes from the IBBI will be good, but even if IBBI says no, it is required, I don't think they can issue any clarification which is overriding the provisions of law. Because if the law doesn't require, then how can IBBI say that it is required? So according to me, it is not required. Okay. Is there a possibility of the same IP who served the pre-PPRP not appointed as RP? I think I've already covered this.
Yes.
Is there time limit for transaction audit 2 years before filing the application? No, I would say no, because he has to get only that information, but the time period which is given in section 43 to 51 will continue to apply because those sections have been applying. Okay, who will control on the separate bank account, CD or RP? Okay. Well, this is not clarified, but if it is a separate bank account, then maybe COC can have a control under its control, or RP can control it, or even CD is controlling it, then it is a separate bank account. Even that does not matter, right? Okay, my ex COs, my ex companies, okay, yeah. Companies. IRP is not disclosing our accepted claim amount employee wise. What to do? Resolution plan is an advanced stage, but IRP is telling us that they are in the mid of finalizing. In fact, we know the total amount approved in the resolution plan for different creditors. Okay. Okay. So you are saying that you are an employee and you have filed a claim. Your claim has been admitted, but what has been provided in the resolution plan, you are not aware of that. That's what you are saying. Okay. So, okay. See, if the plan has been approved, obviously you cannot get a copy of that plan because you are not part of the COC. But if the operational creditors are more than 10% of the debt, then one representative has to be a part of the COC. So once it is known to one OC, then obviously you will be able to get to know of that. But even if something is it is not known to you, and you are not more than 10%, then my suggestion would be file an application to NCLT when the resolution plan approval application is filed, and then you can always put in a point that we are not aware what is being given to us, or whether you have approved the plan or not. I mean, obviously the plan will not come to you for approval also. So, but you can move an application in terms of section 32B. Make use of that provision. File an application. I think NCLT will definitely let you know what is there in the plan. Okay. IRP is saying that gratuity interest are not eligible as not mentioned in the appointment letter. How to know what is happening in COC? Okay, see, there are two things. One is what amount of claim has he accepted? Because I don't know whether your question is only related to acceptance of claim or what is provided in the plan. That there are two different things. First, tell me what is the claim which has been admitted. Has it been the plain vanilla salary, or has he included their gratuity or not? Because he has to include that gratuity also. That is as per law. How can he ignore that? So this is the question which you need to ask. Employees should hire any lawyer to insist IRP to disclose and so and so. Okay. Well, hiring a lawyer will definitely help you because he will send a legal notice and also help you in making the application. So lawyers like me can help you, definitely. Okay. If BRP contains an impairment of statutory dues, can COC approve? No, because statutory dues are operational creditors. They can't approve it at the first stage, but at the second stage, they can approve it. Yes, as statutory dues are OCs, that means impairment of statutory dues operation in the base resolution plan.
These are the response RP, which was there for the same question from on the chat.
Yeah. I think the members have got it right. Yeah. Okay. As the pre-pack option is for MSME, are in financial stress, this means actually the liabilities are greater than the assets. But under balance sheet, both are at 100%. Does it assume the assets shown are at escalated value, maybe high inventory or receivable? What kind of declaration system is given in Form P7? Well, See, the point is, any scheme which is brought in by the government, whether it is OTS, whether it is PPIRP or CIRP, let us be very clear in our mind. It is not meant for unscrupulous people. If you have committed a fraud, your inventories are say only say 20 crores, but you are submitting a list of inventory of 50 crores to the bankers for your DP limit, for the drawing power limit. Well, you are committing a fraud, isn't it? I think those type of things are not possible. See, you can't give a legal, you can't come under legal framework just because of this. This is not possible, my dear friends. So what I believe is, like, obviously they are under stress, so there will be you can say accumulated losses will be there. So therefore the assets will never match the liabilities. Therefore you are going into, you see, the PPIRP and asking that the haircut should be there so that liabilities now match the assets, isn't it? So I think declaration has to be given, but you will have to give a list of assets and liabilities, but whatever exact liabilities are there, you will have to state that. If you don't have physically the stock, then obviously you have to come clean. Otherwise, you guys can be in trouble. I mean, the company can be in trouble at that stage. Okay. What about interest to FC during moratorium period? Well, during moratorium period, you see, definitely the interest is going on to be added. But if it is already declared NPA, obviously it goes into memorandum account. Here, you see, in OTS, the bankers are looking at only the principal amount. They don't even bother about the interest. So I don't think they will be concerned about the interest even during the moratorium, because you are on your own going towards them and asking them that, look, you see, I need this relief from you. So this is the honest scheme which is there. This is just, please consider this, this is an improvement over OTS. OTS has no legal binding. Here there is a legal binding. Here you get moratorium. This is extremely important, friends. Okay. Yes. Any other question?
There are a few more questions on the chat window, sir. Do we have to appoint valuers in this process also?
Yes, I think I've already covered that. So similar to CIRP, the valuers have to be appointed, and 2 registered valuers will give the you see, fair market value as well as the liquidation value. They will have to do that. Yes.
Whether copy of approved resolution plan are available in the public domain?
Generally not. But if you are in Mumbai, the Mumbai benches, while they are passing the orders, some benches are in the habit of copying everything from every word from the resolution plan and making it as part of the order. So if you are lucky to get hold of that order, well, you will get to know what are the approved resolution plans. But otherwise, generally speaking, in 99% of the cases, you will not get to know what is the approved resolution plan. Yes.
How to deal with contingent liabilities and disputed tax demands?
Well, see, as far as the disputed are concerned, you will have to continue that dispute because the company is going to run as a going concern. It is not winding up, right? So go ahead with that. As far as contingent are concerned, like you have given any corporate guarantees or something like that, either you can ask for a haircut or continue with that. So I think they will have to be dealt with in accordance with the facts and circumstances. See, you can submit a plan and you can come out with anything you want. No one is stopping you. You want a haircut of contingent liabilities, you can still ask for it. Whether it is approved or not, that's a separate issue, because it's a matter of negotiation later on. Okay.
So traders are not registered as a MSME, as only manufacturing and service person only. As MSME registration is not mandatory, can traders opt for pre-pack as per the classification?
Okay. See, the point is, if you look at the notifications which are issued under MSMEs, yes, you are right, because if you look at the definition of the enterprise which is given, so because we are calling as MSME and last E stands for enterprise, the definition of word enterprise is given in MSME Act which is there, and that is very clear, which says that traders will not be included. So even if you are into a trading business, then you cannot be qualified as the MSME, whether you satisfy the classification or not, but because you are not an enterprise, and the meaning of enterprise is given in section 2 clause number E. Let me read it for you. Enterprise means an industrial undertaking or a business concern or any other establishment by whatever name called, engaged in the manufacture or production of goods in any manner pertaining to any industry, or rendering of any service or services. So trading organizations are not considered as enterprise. If they are not enterprise, well, you can't be MSME. What my suggestion is, add some of your business to be in production of goods or services, additional business, then you will be registered. Okay. So I'm giving you $1 million advice for free. Okay. Yes. Go ahead. Yes.
Does default means declared as NPA or even pre-NPA can also be considered?
Okay, my friends, let me remove this confusion once and for all. All NPAs are defaults, but all defaults may not be NPAs. A default is a default when the debt becomes due and payable and not paid. NPA becomes only after 90 days. So default is a prior thing. First, there has to be a default. So don't get it confused with NPA. If NPA is there, then definitely there is a default. But default can be there even without an NPA. Okay, I hope I'm clear on this. Okay.
That's the end of the questions which we had.
Okay.
Convener, sir, can you please take over?
Yes, yes.
I think there are 1 or 2 questions which have come to me directly in my chat box, so they have not sent it. So, okay, they are saying, sir, how to deal with section 29AG? Okay, see, as far as 29AG is concerned, now that is of course a typical section which you have mentioned, right? So, I mean, you will have to overcome with that. You have to be satisfying those conditions, otherwise it will not be applicable. And in fact, let me look at section 240A. I think it talks about, just give me a second, 240A. I think it talks about 29AC and 29A G or H. Let me see that. Yeah, it talks about H only. So G is basically in relation to the personal guarantee, right? And if the guarantee has been invoked and has not been paid in full, then of course you are in trouble. When will you not be able to comply with that? Okay. Okay. But as far as the corporate debtor is concerned, that will not come into picture, because please understand, if I am say promoter of the company, has given a guarantee for the debts of the corporate debtor, and my guarantee was invoked and that remains unpaid, then I am ineligible. The corporate debtor still remains eligible. So corporate debtor is eligible. So I think there should be a removal of confusion. Here the plan is to be submitted by the CD, not by the promoters of CD. Okay. So I hope I'm clear on this. Okay. Yes. What someone says, I'm your student from IOD Masterclass, Mumbai, 2014. Wow. So 7 years. Thank you, sir. Okay. Okay. What will be the status of cases filed under Section 138 under Negotiable Instrument Act? Okay, good question. There is a slight change now. Earlier, the jurisprudence was that 138 is of a criminal nature, so it will continue against the corporate debtor also. But recent Supreme Court judgment says that these matters are akin to civil matters. So therefore, they will be covered under moratorium. So any case which is going on against the corporate debtor under Section 138, it will also stop for the time being. But if the case is also going on against the directors of the company or the person who has signed the check, it will continue. Okay. So this is extremely important, friends. Okay. Yes. Any more questions? Let me see if there are any more in my personal chat box. No, I don't think they are there.
So, Mr.
Yeah, no, one person has also mentioned, Mr. P.V. Subramanian. He says, without invitation, can a third party file resolution plan with the COC? The answer is no, sir. It has to be with the when the plan is invited. You cannot submit a plan uninvited, right? You can't be an uninvited guest. Okay. Okay. What does the information on books of account include? Well, information on books of account would mean the list of creditors and other things and the stocks and inventories and other things, like fixed assets and all. How will, okay, I'll take up the last question now. How will the provisions of SARFAESI change due to IBC provisions? Well, Aishwarya ji, as far as SARFAESI is concerned, that will continue. They are not going to change because SARFAESI is an additional option. The PPIRP or the options under IBC are additional remedies. So bankers are still got a chance to go under SARFAESI and invoke those provisions. So I don't think they're going to affect that. But only thing is, once the PPIRP or CIRP is going on, then SARFAESI will take a backseat because there will be a moratorium, right, under Section 14. Okay, ma'am, I think one Mr. Vishnu Kumar has raised his hand. Maybe if we can unmute him.
Arvind, you can unmute Mr. Vishnu Kumar.
Yeah.
Arvind?
Yeah, sir.
Yeah.
चलिए सारी की सारी कहाँ चल रही है फाइल तो बनानी है कहाँ जाकर बातों में लग जाओ चलो बैठो नहीं आप लोग बैठो हम नहीं बनाते ना
Mr. Vishnu Kumar, if you are hearing us, can you, you have raised your hand? I think, sir, there is some confusion.
So one Mr. Rakesh Tulasyan has raised his hand. So you can unmute him, Rakesh Tulasyan. Arvind ji, please unmute Rakesh Tulasyan.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
Regarding that PIRP, when CD will give the name to the corporate to the financial creditors, whether they should be agreeing on that name first, and then the declaration will be filed by the management.
Well, number one, CD will not be giving a name to the financial creditors. The names will be proposed by the financial creditors only who are having more than 10% of the total value of debt. Only they are entitled to propose the name. And supposing there are 2, 3, 5 names are there, then out of those names, one will be approved by 66% majority of the unrelated financial creditors. So CD has no role to play. But his job, the CD's role is to convene a meeting, get the name approved, and then also get the approval of the unrelated FCs to file the application. That is what this is. Okay.
Yeah, sir, one of the members had asked any comment on Jet Airways resolution plan.
Well, I mean, to what extent you are asking for the comments, sir? Because the plan is definitely, you see, is yet to be approved. We all know that. And at the end of the day, see, I feel is these are the national assets. They should come back to the society. And assuming, you see, if there are few airlines are there, the prices will skyrocket, isn't it? So if there are more players are there, and Jet Airways was a wonderful airline, isn't it?
Right.
So I think it should come back on its feet. That is my belief. First, it should not have gone to CIRP. They should have supported it. But having gone there, at least now we should support and come back to all these things.
Mr. Vijay Gangwani is asking, under IBC, would there be a situation that OC will be faced with 100% impairment of their dues?
Well, Mr. Vijay, if you are talking about IBC, yes, this is happening. This is a reality. In many cases, OCs are not being given anything. I mean, only 1% or 2% of their debts, which is actual equivalent to 100% of the haircut only, isn't it? But in PPIRP, I think OCs are at a very advantageous position because first condition is that, look, if there is an impairment, then it will not be approved at the first day. So there is a protection to that extent. So I think that's very important. Okay.
Now I think there are no questions, sir. So we can move forward. So, sir, the presentation made by you was very crisp and informative. and within the given time of 1.5 hours, you had covered this vast topic. And now I request our Deputy Convener CA Jayesh Thakkar ji to give a formal vote of thanks to Ashish ji.
Thank you, Convener Sir Krishna Kumar ji, for giving me this opportunity to propose hearty vote of thanks to our today's speaker, CA Advocate Ashish Makhija sir. Sir, you have well covered the today's topic, and we really appreciate the way you have covered the process and amendments. And at the beginning, you said for any of our member, if they want to expertise in this particular domain, you are always there. So we really acknowledge this kind of efforts from your end, sir. Thank you for accepting our invitation and devoting your valuable time with us. And we also thank Sri Vijayta Jaiswal ji for coordinating today's webinar. And we thank all the members for taking most advantage for participating in this particular webinar. We thank all of you and thanks for joining. And now with the permission of all of you, we may close today's session.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, and
Yeah,
it was a pleasure to interact with the fraternity.
yes,
Thank you.
thank you. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Thank you.